Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this briefing on measuring the impact of incarceration on individuals, neighborhoods, and society. I'm Dr. Nancy Vigne. I head up the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute here in Washington, D.C., where we do a considerable amount of research on the topic of incarceration and reentry. I'm really honored to be chairing this panel today on behalf of the Population Association of America, also known as PAA, and the Association for Public Policy Analysis and Management, known as APAM. PAA is a professional association comprised of over 3,000 population scientists, including demographers, sociologists, and economists. They conduct research on the individual, societal, and environmental implications of human population change. APAM is a nonprofit association dedicated to improving public policy and management by fostering excellence in research, analysis, and education. PAA and APAM members alike are dedicated to conducting scientific research that can be used to inform evidence-based policymaking. They conduct their interdisciplinary, policy-relevant research with direct and indirect support from federal research and statistical agencies, including the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, the Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So today's briefing focuses on a very important and timely topic. I think we've all heard the concept of mass incarceration. Everyone's aware that we're housing millions of people, members of society every day in prisons and jails. But far too often we only talk about the impact of incarceration on individuals and not so much impact on their families left behind and on neighborhoods and communities and societies overall. So we're really fortunate to have two distinguished scholars on today's panel who have studied these issues extensively. They are, to my immediate right, Dr. Jeff Morenoff, and also Dr. Sam of Michigan, and Sam, or Samuel? Sam, please. Sam, please. Okay, I'll call you Sam, please. Is with the University of Chicago. They're very distinguished. I've been aware of and admirer of their work, and they have pretty extensive bios, which I would invite you to look at. They're in your packets. I also wanted to thank Congressman Tim Walberg's office. They helped us to reserve this room today, and Congressman Danny Davis's office has helped distribute the letter to promote the event, and it looks like that surely worked today. Truly standing room only, so very impressive. There is a seat up front here and one over here if you want to make yourself comfortable.
There's another chair here.
Oh, yes. One over there, maybe easier. So a few housekeeping items before we begin, and bear with me. First of all, I want to assure you that the speakers today are here not to express or advocate for any specific policy, right? They are scholars, they are researchers, they're here to deliver evidence that could inform policy and practice. Any positions they may choose to express are theirs and theirs alone and do not reflect the positions taken by PAA or APAM. You should have slides in your folders from the presentation, and I understand that these will be made available online shortly after this briefing. And we're going to hold questions until the end of both speakers' presentations. We're going to give each speaker about 20 minutes to speak, and I'll make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. I might ask a few questions of my own. So also I just wanted to mention how many folks are on Twitter. Twitter? Yes? Okay. Please tweet, and when you do, use hashtag incarceration impacts. So with that, thank you again for attending. I'm now going to turn over the podium to Sam, also known as Sam, please. Two really excellent and provocative presentations. I know you're all dying to ask questions, but I think it's my prerogative to ask the first two, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Bear with me. So Sam, very rigorous analysis. The overall finding is that incarceration is not cost beneficial, yes? I would argue that it's even less cost beneficial than you said for two reasons. One is, I don't think your models included the cost of the crimes that happen behind bars, correct?
They would if they ended up in the courts.
Yeah, I can assure you they don't.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just think it's important to know, like, incarceration doesn't necessarily mean that crime goes away. There's a lot of horrible things that happen behind bars. There are victimizations that occur that often don't come to the light of day, aren't counted, but still have costs. They have cost to the system, cost to the individual, and cost to society. And then my second question / comment is around this, for me, rather troubling finding that incarceration of a parent benefits the child, and I'm sure you've encountered, some strong reactions to that. My reactions have to do with what I know about the literature about impact on behavior, educational impact, psychological impacts. There's a lot there to unpack. I'm guessing that you were unable to put a price tag on those types of impacts. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So we think that there's big psychological impacts of parental incarceration, and this is kind of another thing that is fully outside what we can put numbers on.
Mm-hmm. But if you were able to quantify it and include it, it would mean that incarceration was even less cost beneficial.
I think that's probably right. I mean, I don't think it's right that every child is facing psychological harm when their parent is incarcerated. Often they're going to live in a more stable environment, typically with grandparents or with the non-criminally involved parent. And so for those children, I think that it is likely to be even a psychological benefit. If we add it all up, though, yeah, I think it's likely that you would end up with another net negative.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Thank you. All right, Jeff, on to you. I loved your research and your findings. In part, maybe it's narcissistic because so much of what you found mirrors what we found many years ago with our own longitudinal study of reentry, particularly around the residential mobility and the both good and bad reasons why people moved, right? And like some people moved because they intentionally didn't want to go back on the same street corner with the same negative influences, right? But that also meant that they were moving further away, potentially, from their families and that family support. Some people moved away from their original neighborhoods because their families were forced out because they couldn't afford to stay there because their family member was incarcerated and they were a main breadwinner, right? There's a lot to unpack here that I think has policy implications. I'd love to hear your response to that, and also we found some distinct differences in degree and level and type of family support for men returning home from prison versus women. I'm wondering if you found similar themes.
Great question. I think you had more ability in your study to disentangle the effects on men or women. We had a very small sample. I think I would say that one thing I guess I touched on a little bit was that women do face I think that when they're part of a couple, they often face that threat of coercion a lot more than men do. That they're with guys who are bad influences on them. I don't know what the gender differences. I'd like to hear more about your gender differences. But more generally, I'd like to unpack that whole. What do we make out of all this? I think that one thing is. That paradox that I pointed out about like withdrawing from the community as a strategy of intentional social isolation can be beneficial in the short run maybe, but damaging in the long run. I think that since we're on Capitol Hill and thinking about federal roles in this, I think that supports for families who are shouldering that burden of reintegration are a mechanism that we should all be thinking about more. As we know, people coming out of prison are ineligible for a lot of benefits. But we should be thinking of ways of trying to help the families who are really trying to provide that housing and that food and everything else, and through federal benefits. So that's the beginnings of an answer.
Yeah. So our study found that men were more likely to have all manner of family support. Nearly all the men had a woman in their lives, right?
Yep.
It might be an aunt, a mother, a grandmother, an intimate partner. They always had someone, right?
Yep.
The women who came out, largely, if they had family support, they were relying on their adult children for it. I think that probably holds true with your research.
Yeah, that even with our small sample, but same dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Great. I will not hog the podium anymore. I'm sure many of you have questions. Who's first? Don't make a liar of it. Oh, yes.
How you doing, Sam? My name is Dominic. I know this is probably a touchy subject, but, or touchy thing to say, we'll talk about, but you mentioned that the mass incarceration happened in terms of the 1960s, and it grew. Do you think that, because the bottom line is this, and it hurts me, African-American, especially African-American men, are more incarcerated than their Caucasian inmates. So do you think that the harsh treatment that African Americans went through during the civil rights movement, like Dr. King going to jail or anybody going to jail, do you think that that's part of the reason why there was a decline, must not decline, but an increase in mass incarceration? I'm not asking you to be political, but I'm just saying, do you think it's possible?
No, I mean, I think it's clear that criminal justice policy in the U.S. is very racialized, and it's not possible to separate those things out. Right? Like, I'm not an expert on it, but you know, we know from recent history, for example, that crack cocaine was penalized at 100 times the rate of regular cocaine, and that there's a clear racial angle there. And so I think it would be silly to say that there was no racial angle in anything that happened before that.
Put another way, the criminal justice system is an extension of our history of slavery and lynching and Jim Crow. That's my take. Others?
I spent some time both in New Hampshire and then conversely in Louisiana, which I'm not sure if this relates to y'all's studies, but they're very opposite sides of the spectrum in regards to public education systems. New Hampshire and the Northeast states generally have a higher rate of public education versus Louisiana and some of those deep southern states having lower rates of that. Could you talk on the cost of that? Because that would be like a preemptive strike time to that deal. Can you educate the population better? Could you increase that cost? Or conversely, coming back from incarceration, how could you relate public education to a policy that might help reintegration?
You have anything to say? Okay. I would say, so I can't speak to these differences across different states, you know, based on the quality of the school systems there. But I do, I think that education is a very key component here in thinking about, first of all, who ends up in prison, but then also what their chances are after getting out. And one of the policy levers that we really write about and endorse is like trying to get more access to higher education, especially for people in prison, which I think is really critical. And it's critical, so there's several reasons that it's important. And one of them, as a professor and other people here on the panel who are professors, we like to think it's all about all the wisdom that we impart to people. It's not all about that. I mean, there's also the more symbolic aspect of having put yourself, having made the sacrifice and had the determination to go and get a degree, and what that signals to employers, for example, about your, you know, what kind of potential employee you would be. And I have some colleagues who write about this idea of signaling theory in economics, about like how education is one means that people have to send the signal to, that they would be a strong employee. But people coming out of prison are kind of denied that opportunity a lot. And one of the interesting, so one of the, what's somewhat disappointing as a finding is that job training programs, when you look at randomized control trials, don't have a lot of impact on chances of finding work and having a high income after prison. On the other hand, a lot of people who go through job training programs get placed in work, and they have very high placement rates, and they look successful. It's just when you look at them through the lens of a randomized control trial, they appear to be unsuccessful. So to make sense out of those two findings, it could be the idea that what's happening is that people who would be more likely to find work to begin with are going into those job training programs, and they're providing people the opportunity to send that signal, and they are getting hired because they set aside some income that they could have had more immediately, maybe because they put themselves through this training program, and this was their credential coming out that sent a signal to employers that I really am committed to changing myself and to being a good employee. So I think that having more opportunities to send signals like that to employers is a really important thing.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that. There's also just this question of timing that kind of disappointingly doing job training for people that are just getting out of prison doesn't really work. But we do know that investing in education earlier on tends to have higher returns. And so my colleague Jim Heckman at UChicago has done a lot of work on programs in the 60s and 70s that provided very intense structured support for low-income families. So this is the Perry preschool program, most famously. And what we see is that the kids that got those supports ended up committing fewer crimes in the future. And so I think that kind of pushing back when we're doing the educational investments can increase the benefits.
And I would just add another angle to it, which is that one hypothesis is that some of these job training programs aren't working because they're only looking at one piece in the puzzle, right? Everyone's like, oh, we just have to get them a job and it'll be okay, not recognizing that they might have long and serious histories with substance use disorders and other issues that make it very hard to find and keep a job. So, you know, in some of the literature that we've looked at, my conclusion is that you really need to take both a holistic approach to supporting people in reentry, but also a tailored one that responds to their unique needs and also assets. I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to have to close.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what you think those who are mentally ill who get incarcerated, should they be incarcerated or put in a hospital? I ask this because 46% of those in the federal prison system are mentally ill, and do you think it'd be more beneficial for them to go to a hospital versus being incarcerated?
So I haven't done any specific research on this, but I can just tell you that, I mean, I'm aware this is a big issue. Mental illness also goes, unfortunately, hand in hand with substance use a lot, and that was something that, I mean, we knew going into our study that substance use was going to be an issue. We didn't know how big of an issue it was. On the other hand, mental illness is not necessarily very correlated with like the likelihood of committing a violent crime after prison. So, but the people who are mentally ill, yeah, the conditions of incarceration are just awful, and spending time in solitary, especially, if you have mental illness going in, can be just, you know, life damaging. So I would, yeah, I think that the more that we can divert people from prison, the better off most people will be, especially for mentally ill.
Okay, well, we're done, right? Is this time up? Okay. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience.